14 years. I'm a 25-year financial services executive, originally from a small town, very similar to many of the counties in District 9. I was born in Southern Georgia. Both of my grandfathers were farmers, and my dad was a civil rights activist and went on to become the first African-American elected to the county commission. My mother made her career in textile factories, and following in her footsteps, I helped to finance my college by working summers in a paper factory myself. I went on to Spelman College, where I got my bachelor's in math and received a master's in statistics. And I definitely see that my mix of rural and urban values are a blend, and will make sure that I support everyone in District 9, from Mecklenburg to Robinson County. And I plan to be a fighter for our economic values and outcomes. And what that means is fighting for better paying jobs, access to affordable healthcare for everyone, reduction of the gender pay gap, and reduction of the spiraling cost of a college education. So I just want to talk briefly about some things that have happened as it relates to broadband and legislation from a federal perspective. So there's been 4 bills passed for coronavirus relief. Back on March 3rd, there was a bill passed, $8 billion. And then on March 13th, they passed an additional legislation that had a strong bipartisan support, with every Democrat and all 140 Republicans voting for that bill. There were only 40 Republicans that voted no, and one of them was the current representative of District 9, Mr. Dan Bishop. And what he voted no to was increased SNAP benefits to help people eat at a time when we had also obviously gone through sudden job losses. He voted no to free coronavirus testing as well as treatment. You know, he voted no to expanding the Family and Medical Leave Act and giving some additional resources for people. One of the things that you'll get when you all support me, and with your support, is someone that definitely believes that our health, our outcomes are tied between our health and our economic safety and security. So the other bill that passed right after that one on March 13th was on March 27th was the CARES Act. And obviously we all know with that bill, that's what provided $1,200 for families based on their income, and then additional monies based on children and dependents. But it also actually had some elements of expansion of broadband that were a part of it. So I want to give you guys a little bit of update of things that people might not have heard about from that bill. So one of the things it did from a support for education, it provided over $1 billion of education emergency relief funds. And those things were going to Title I schools. But it also gave $25 million for distance learning and telemedicine to expand investments in telemedicine and broadband. There was also an aspect of the bill that looked at telemental health services for isolated veterans. So those who have given so much to us, and in this time of stay at home, it provided for additional access for those that might be struggling. And as many of us know, we've seen an alarming increase in suicide rates for our veterans. And so giving additional access to that telemental health was definitely helpful with our veterans who, you know, we're not able to be as close to as obviously we would like during this time. It also, for the rural communities, gave $100 million for Broadband Reconnect, and another $25 million to support distance learning and telemedicine programs. And as we all, you know, went through the stay at home and with the concern of coronavirus, many people were very uncomfortable at going into doctor's offices. And even some doctor's offices did not want people to come in unless they were dealing with coronavirus issues. And that's where some of these divides that we're going to talk about today became even more present to many of us that may not have experienced them, but understanding what, you know, I live in Charlotte. And so my access to telehealth is seamless. But if I live in parts of Anson or in Robinson County, which has some of the, you know, the least amount of access to broadband, that wasn't something that was readily able for them to participate in. And then finally here in North Carolina, that CARES Act also gave money to our state government, and we got about $3.5 billion that came to North Carolina. They've appropriated about $1.5 billion of that a couple weeks ago on a Saturday. They passed them how they were going to start spending those dollars they got for COVID relief. And they've actually appropriated about $9 million of that money to expand broadband access. So that's kind of where we are so far in this in the near term of things that's happened legislatively. But what else can be done? What are some of the other things? One of the things that the federal government can do is to look at block grants to give to the states to support the purchase of hotspots, cellular enabled laptops, and equipment for Wi-Fi on buses. I know that's something that, was when, kids were suddenly sent home, there were places where they actually used those buses with Wi-Fi to allow those children to continue to learn. We can make sure that health care coverage, health care insurance covers telemedicine. That isn't a given. You might think it is, but the rates that they pay people for not having you come into the office can be different. So we've got to improve and make sure insurance covers that and covers it effectively so people aren't losing money. And then also infrastructure. The issue of broadband, while obviously we know impacts our students, it impacts our ability to get help, it hurts our businesses to compete as well. But it really is an issue of infrastructure at the end of the day. So being able to get those resources. So can we look at some low interest funding and financing for infrastructure projects to improve and increase access to broadband? So those are a little bit of the things that have happened legislatively, some ideas of things that we need to push for as we move forward. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Helen to tell you a little bit about herself and, say any other comments she wants to about this issue.
Thank you, Cynthia. I really appreciate that. Good evening, everyone. My name is Helen Probst Mills, and I'm the Democratic candidate for State Senate District 25. That's Anson, Richmond, Scotland, and Moore counties. I'm thrilled to be running. I ran in 2018. We did a pretty good job, and we're just finishing our job here in 2020. I am an attorney by background. I'm a trustee at Sand Hills Community College. I'm an overcommitted volunteer in my community here in Pinehurst. I'm the proud mother of 3 children. I've been married for, more than 25 years. I can't remember exactly how many, to my husband, who's the executive director of our Moore County Literacy Council. I am very interested in ensuring that we expand Medicaid in the state of North Carolina. I'm a breast cancer survivor, and I can't imagine how we expect anyone to go through such difficult medical issues without having access to insurance. Unfortunately, in the time that we're currently going through, it has ripped the Band-Aid off, and we see right in front of us the impact of the lack of health insurance across our country. It is devastating. I'm also the product of public schools, and I'm a very strong proponent for public education. My sister is a public school teacher outside of Wilmington, and I know how little we pay our North Carolina teachers. I'm an advocate for ensuring that we look at our teachers as the professionals that they are, and that we pay them the professional salary that they deserve. This pandemic, and let me just stop here and say that I hope you're all well. And man, I never thought in my lifetime that I'd be using the word pandemic in sentences on a regular basis. This pandemic, unfortunately, has also revealed the huge disparity in our public school education system. Gloria touched on some of the things that have been done by various boards of education across the district in order to address the lack of access to broadband for some of our students. I think Google about 2 or 3 years ago was actually pioneering this idea of having hotspots on buses as kind of a, hey, cool, look at us, we're Google thing. And here we have boards of education using much needed dollars, buying hotspots and driving these buses out into the communities so that the children are able to do their education online. That's not a feasible alternative. That's not workable in the long run. Here at the community college, we put some money into purchasing more boosters for our own system-wide internet on the campus for Sand Hills Community College, and we let all our students know, drive up and park next to the library and you'll be able to use the Wi-Fi there. That's not sustainable either. I don't know about you, but when your homework needs doing, you don't want to necessarily have to hop in a car and drive somewhere. It's time as citizens of this state that we step back and make the much needed long-term investment in rural broadband, and that we look at it as the infrastructure issue that it really is. Years ago, North Carolina was very forward-looking and made a long-term investment in rural electrification, and it's the same need here in a very different way. This isn't about people being able to play a video game or chatting with their friends on WhatsApp or something like that. This is about people being able to have access to doctors. This is about children being able to do their homework. This is about people being able to run the small business that they've got the great idea for, but they're in Anson County and they don't have access. And how do they promote that business without being able to get online? We need to finally take that decision and decide that this is the right thing to do, not just for the moral reason of educating our kids, but for the economic reason of our state. We know that when businesses are looking at coming to parts of our state, they're looking at infrastructure, they're looking at education, and they're looking at quality of life for their employees. One of the things they're looking at undoubtedly is the ability for the manager of that plant to go home and buy whatever he wants from Amazon. And if we don't have that and we're not competitive in that way, we're losing corporations and other companies who are looking at coming here because we're not providing the services that they really need. Representative Brewer, who I believe is on the call, it just introduced a bill into the House, which provides a lot of the way in which it is possible to get broadband into the parts of our state that don't have it. It's complicated and it's going to require investment, but I firmly believe that we are a forward-looking state and that we want the best for all our children and all our citizens, and I think that we can get behind this. I'm happy to take any questions, but I think it's probably on to Representative Brewer at the moment. Cynthia?
I'm not sure if he has joined us yet. Looks like his that meeting is going a little bit long. So we will go ahead and look at some of the questions we've already received, and then we'll interrupt. So Robert, just send me a little note in the chat and let us know when Representative Brewer is here, so that we can we'll pause and let him introduce himself. So thank you, Helen, for your comments. And as Helen mentioned, she was in this race in 2018 and ran a very strong race. Helen stayed committed to the district and never left. I'm sure folks from Anson and Richmond and Scotland can attest to it, that that she's been there for them outside of just running for office, which is what it takes, someone that's dedicated to the community, and Helen has shown that. And I think we're going to push you across the finish line this time. So with that, we will take some look at some of the questions that we did receive in advance. One of them that's similar, kind of connected, but I'll just kind of go on a different slant. I was asked, what committee would I be interested in serving in, when I go to Congress? And I would say the Agricultural Committee would definitely be a place where I would like to serve. As I mentioned, I grew up in a small town surrounded by farmers, with my grandfathers, my uncles, my grandmother, everyone, many folks in my family, including myself. When you grow up in a farming family, that means everybody does some kind of farming work at some point. And so, as we've seen what's happened with a lot of the corporate farms, I want to go there to work on issues that will help our family farmers. How can we strengthen them and bring back a tradition that is critical to our country, bring it back. Also, rural infrastructure, as we talked about, it would be something that I would definitely want to dedicate myself to working on. Food insecurity, when we look at what's happened, with the sudden job loss and 30 million plus people unemployed, we've seen the lines in our food banks. We've seen the needs of people in our community, and within the Agricultural Committee, there are things that we can do to help. People were already living in food deserts, and so how do we improve those situations that are exacerbated and made even worse when we end up in a pandemic like we've had. And I know when Helen, when you said, never thought I'd use the word pandemic, who, was talking about PPE. I mean, that's like dinner conversation now, so those are some of the things that I would want to do when, I go to Congress. So Helen, here's a question for you. The question is about if broadband infrastructure issue like rural electricity once was, what are the cooperatives were created to support it? So how does that connect with that issue?
Sorry, Cynthia, you broke up a little bit. Could you say that one more time, please?
Okay, so the question is about broadband being an infrastructure issue like rural electricity once was. So is there an opportunity for cooperatives to be created to support it, similar to what happened with rural electricity?
I think that is one of the suggestions in terms of how to ensure we can roll it out to the parts of the state that don't necessarily have the funding for the actual infrastructure itself. Part of Representative Brewer's bill also includes different economic incentives for the companies to ensure that they would be in the counties that don't necessarily have the funds to afford it either. There are a couple different ways you can do it, and I'm not an expert in terms of what the best and most efficient way would be necessarily, but I think that we need to decide as a state that this is a #1 priority. We are in an amazing place economically as a state. We have a very high credit rating, and we could easily decide that this would be something that we would want to issue bonds for. That would also give us some at this time.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Helen.
Something else I'd like to add, Cynthia, which I should have touched on earlier. One of the things that I think we all take for advantage as we're sitting here, seeing each other and virtually visiting with each other, it's an opportunity over the internet to engage civically. I don't know about you, but undoubtedly, many of you have probably streamed some interesting musical performance that might have been done locally with no audience actually in the room. But this is an important aspect of our lives currently, and especially as we look towards the future with this pandemic and whether or not we're going to have periods of time where we may possibly have to stay home again. We do need the ability to connect and to be engaged on civic issues. Many of you, I'm sure, can listen in to your various village council, town meetings, et cetera, to stay involved and to know what issues are being addressed. And this is something that has to be afforded to everyone, not just those of us who have the access to broadband currently.
Okay. And one of the things, when we look at our district as well, our county, our 100 counties are put into these, tiers based on their economic distress. And 5 of the 8 counties of District 9 are in that tier 1 of economic distress. And one of the opportunities, that is being afforded to those is the GREAT program. So I'm not sure how many folks are familiar with that. So it's the Growing Rural Economies with Access to Technology. And there are funds for those counties that are in those distressed tier 1. And it specifically has a focus on, increasing broadband. And so I think there's a question about the money, and I know Representative Harris is here in case he may, have some information specifically about. There's a question about how the $9 million is being spent. But I know that there definitely is an effort to increase those grant amounts and to speed up the ability for counties to qualify for those grants to help them out with their rural infrastructure for broadband. All right, and Robert, has Representative Brewer joined yet?
No, I think he's trying to log on, but he hasn't joined
Okay.
just a second. So I'll give you an update in just a moment.
All right.
We're very fortunate here in Moore County. Sandhills Community College has just unveiled a new program called the Fast Track. And this idea is that you can do online a whole host of different courses at the speed at which is appropriate for you and the way in which you study. We just see so many opportunities that are being made available to people via the internet, and it is just not fair that it is not available for all the people in this district. And I think that we just really need to decide that this is a priority in our state.
Okay, now there was also a question about us reaching the poor underserved population so that they can learn virtually. And so, this the broadband issue is, as as Helen and we've talked about, it is an issue of access to education. And so those students in those counties that were already behind, a situation like that, what we've been in, is going to even increase those disparities. And so their ability to, when we say, okay, well, everyone goes home and now you've got to learn, you've got to do Zoom calls. When they don't have that access, they can't stay online. The download and upload speeds are just too slow for them to have any successful opportunity to learn. And so I know there's opportunities as well with our libraries, though unfortunately many of them were shuttered, but adding more money to those rural libraries to also expand the access to broadband. Now, Helen, there's a question about, I guess, CenturyLink outside of Southern Pine. So it's a kind of more specific question. It's saying that the internet is slow and unreliable, and it makes it difficult for family members trying to work from home, and then they can't do that, which is obviously what we're all having to do. Do you know what might be in for the near future? And also the cost are expensive in the rural areas as well for these services.
Yes, and that is something that if we would expand broadband throughout the state, and if we would provide monies from the government to put the infrastructure in place, we would have a little bit more competition. And that would ensure that everybody, regardless of Southern Pines or Dobbin Heights, had access to good high-speed internet. And that is really what the intention is. I believe that Representative Brewer might be on now, Cynthia.
I'm here.
Hey, Scott.
How are you this evening?
Good. Looks like we just have you by voice, or you're here on the camera. We have so many folks here. We got a lot of screens.
I hit join by video.
There you go. Well, I see you.
Here somewhere.
All right. Well, we wanted to just pause, and this is Representative Brewer, that's representing House 166. And so, Representative Brewer, you want to just introduce yourself to the group, and I know you wanted to talk a bit about the bill you've put out there.
All right, thank you, Cynthia. I'm sorry I'm late. We just came from an appropriations meeting where we got the grim news about the budget forecast for the state of North Carolina, and it's not going to be pretty. So it's sort of been a tough day. But I do want to talk about the bill I've introduced. I represent Richmond, Montgomery, and part of Stanley County. And Montgomery County, and much like Anson, it's not well served by broadband access. The bill that we have filed is addressing this issue on a number of fronts. It's providing up to $85 million in grants for businesses, schools, whoever can qualify for the grant to expand the accessibility to broadband. The bill also provides money for devices for students to be able to log in. You may have some homes that have 3, 4 kids that are having different levels of education, whether it's high school, middle school, elementary school, that may need more than one device in the household to be able to be on at the same time and to be able to do the things that they want to do. And so this bill would provide more money to make more devices accessible to more students. It's going to allow for public-private partnerships to expand broadband service. And by that, I mean it will let local communities, cities, towns, or a county even set up its own infrastructure for broadband and then lease it out to service providers. The goal of the bill is to get as much out as quickly as we can. This crisis, I think, has shown us that broadband access is more important now than ever. It may be our most important infrastructure. Like running electricity in the 30s and the 20s was important. And building roads in the 50s and 60s was the most important thing that we can do. Broadband is rivaling that now to get access for everybody because of the importance of school, to be able to work at home. People now who may have had satellite service for their internet and satellite service for their broadband are finding when they're trying to use it for work or use it for school is simply not up to the task. So that we need to go, and really it's that last mile. It's the most expensive mile for any provider to use. It's like the last mile of a road going down to one house at the end of a long dirt road to get it paid. It's always that last mile that's the most expensive thing. And we're hoping that this bill will address all of those issues and get the service out there because it needs to be done. Whoever can do it the most efficiently and the most quickly, that's where we need to put our resources. So that's briefly what the bill is about.
Representative Brewer, there's a question about the number of the bill. What's your the bill number?
All right, it is, I got to look at it here real quick. House Bill 1122.
1122.
There's some other bills that have been filed out there that also address this. So I'm hoping we can bring all of these bills together and we can talk about all the different approaches and come up with a universal approach to this.
Yeah, and this is definitely one of those things, right, that should not be a partisan issue. You
Absolutely.
know, Democrats, Republicans represent rural places, or even there are places in Mecklenburg, even though we're, you know, an urban, you know, place that also have pockets of, you know, almost internet insecurity and lack of broadband access. And so this is something that we need to come together and solve.
It's like roads. Roads are not a partisan issue. You need to build good roads where people are. And so whatever type of business you have or travel you need to do, you have access to good roads. It's just as important and it's just as not political. And we need to find a way to do it because you're going to have neighborhoods like in Richmond County, Dobbins Heights, right next to Hamlet, that is not going to maybe have the same level of service. And it's simply a matter of expanding it out. And a lot of it, I understand businesses don't think they're going to have enough paying customers. We need to find a piece to address that too, where the businesses can find that they can make money on it because, you know, nobody expects them to give their service away to provide internet, but we need to find a way that we could all work together to solve the problem for everyone because this is not something that's going to go away. You think about it in Richmond County, for example, in the northern part of the county, when you have snow and ice, it may only affect Ellerby North, but all the schools close. If you have the type of broadband capability for the schools, school can continue remotely. You don't have to make those days up during spring break or on a Saturday or in the summer. So this is not just to deal with what we're dealing with now in a health crisis. It's to look down the road to other issues as well.
Now, Representative Brewer, so I'm going to ask you two questions, one that we got earlier and one that's in the chat. So there's a question about your bill and whether it has bipartisan support. So that's one question.
I think that it will.
Okay, and then the other question that we got in advance, we received in advance was, if online learning is essential for future education, what does that mean for the state's obligation, particularly in the light of Leandro?
Well, I think Leandro has pointed out the disparities in funding of education across the state, that not every child is getting a sound basic education. And they highlight that it's even more true in the rural areas of this state, that the inequality exists. The access to broadband only heightens that and makes it even more imperative that we solve it. If we can solve the piece with broadband, you take that first step into solving some of the education pieces. And admittedly, it's going to be a lot harder to do with a budget deficit that we may be dealing with to address all these issues at one time, but we need to get us started. It seems like broadband is the best place to get started, is to get that access and then let us move out from there. And like I said, there are many ideas, some sponsored by Democrats, some sponsored by Republicans. We all have the same goal. We just have different means of getting there.
Okay. And also, I know I did reference, but I do want to acknowledge that we do have, I kind of did it in a glancing way, Representative Wesley Harris with us. North Carolina House 105. And Wesley, I don't know if you want to just say hello and I think you're on mute. There you
Hey,
go.
hey, everybody. Yeah, Cindy said I'm Wesley Harris. I represent very southern Mecklenburg County over here in Charlotte. Good to be with y'all. Y'all got three great speakers. I love all these people, and we need to get Cynthia in Congress. We need to keep Scott in the House. We need to get Helen to the state Senate, and we would all be much better off if that happened.
Thank you, Wesley. Wesley understands the economics impact of this better than anybody, or should I say Dr. Harris does. He knows the importance of this and what the financial impact can be by providing this service. And he's been important to our caucus in helping us understand that, and we appreciate his leadership.
Yep. And even the interconnection to this also in the economy, speaking of, is also an impact of how businesses decide where they go. Businesses go where there's an educated population. And as we know, for the foreseeable future, there's going to be more and more need for people to work from home, as well as students to learn from home. And so this is, as you mentioned, Representative Brewer, just a pressing issue to help ensure that our rural counties and places where that lack of broadband is such a big issue don't suffer even more than other places, while this is just even more important and critical for us even moving and staying afloat. It's a necessity, it's an imperative. So Helen, I have a question for you on one that we received a little earlier. In addition to broadband, how do we ensure that people in rural areas have adequate technology to take advantage of it?
I think Representative Brewer mentioned in his bill that there is a provision in it to ensure that children have the component pieces that they need in their home in order to take advantage of the technology. I know that Moore County schools provided more Chromebooks when they were needed as the pandemic began, and so did the community college. I think we just need to take a step back and acknowledge that these are the tools for education. It is no longer a pencil and a notebook, and we need to ensure that the children have the tools in order to become educated. There's a question in the chat as well, Cynthia, about how, if someone is computer illiterate, do they learn? I would argue that that is a very, very fine place for our community colleges. We run many programs of that nature. Struggling to know how you do that remotely. Both my sister, who's a special education teacher, is having a hard time doing special ed remotely, and my husband has yet to figure out how to do literacy training over the internet as well. But I have no doubt that as we are dealing with this new way of learning and being, we are having smarter people than I looking at this and figuring out how to ensure that it is possible to teach computer literacy or literacy to someone in their home over the internet. So the community college is a very good space where we have some incredibly good individuals who are always figuring out new and different ways to do things. So I don't have any doubt that they wouldn't come up with a way to ensure that that is rolled out to individuals in their homes. I do think, though, that we have to keep in mind, much in the way when we put telephone services in, ultimately, I know certainly where I grew up, there was an opportunity to receive a free telephone eventually, and a very basic service depending upon, and obviously this is some where private foundation monies may come in. But I totally agree with Representative Brewer. The access to broadband at this time in our lives is exactly like rural electrification, and we just need to decide that this is important, it's a priority, and it's a necessity for our state.
Yeah. And even as, when we passed this legislation and we've gotten support with orders from the governor about, not evicting people from, their places of residence, we need to ensure that we don't, block people's internet access because they haven't paid, because we're in this economic distress, because it is just as important as having a roof over your head to be able to have that connectivity. And so those are some of the things that we also need to ensure during this difficult time, that people aren't also losing their internet and their cellular service. In the same way, we won't let them be evicted from their homes. because of
Well,
lack of payment.
You know, Cynthia, a lot of the providers have really stepped up to the plate and said they weren't going to do that, especially for folks that have kids in the home and are needing to learn. They've done a good job, and they've really done a good job in setting up mobile hotspots for kids to learn. It's not a long-term solution. It's a very short-term solution.
Exactly.
It's not the best, but they really have stepped up. And grants through the Great Grant program can really help these businesses expand their service footprint out, and that's what we think is important.
Yeah, but we talked about that a little bit. I brought that up a little bit earlier, Representative Brewer, that so many in District 9, 5 of the 8 counties in District 9 are in Tier 1. That would be eligible for those great grants. Representative Brewer, there's a question about people. Why do you think people may be against rural broadband, and what are some ways to address those concerns?
Well, most of it has been that private business is wanting to do it, but it's just not profitable for them to do it. Therefore, it hasn't gotten done. And that's the hurdle we've got to overcome. And the grants help that out. The working in partnership with local governments can help that out on that hurdle. Like I said, it's the last mile, the most expensive part that has the lowest return for business. So we need to do that and help them get over that hurdle with the infrastructure, if that's what's needed, to provide the service. Because as businesses find that folks can work from home and they're not needed in offices anymore, for many parts of the 9th District, it's going to open up areas for growth in areas like Anson County along the lakes and rivers, and Montgomery County along the lakes. Just some beautiful places to live that need to have the access to broadband so people can work there. And I think you will find that if we have the broadband service for businesses that are going to have their employees work from home, it's really going to open up these rural areas to good paying jobs, come to their communities where people are going to invest in the communities and work even some of their own businesses in those communities. That's why it's important. It can be a great engine for rural economic growth.
Okay.
Cynthia, if I could just ask
Yes.
Representative Brewer a quick question. Representative Brewer, I noted in your bill you've included provisions regarding telehealth, which is so important. Can you speak a little bit about how that might interplay with federal requirements? Is it possible that simply through your bill passing the state that we would be able to have policies to encompass telehealth to the same extent that they do physical appointments?
Well, we're hoping so, because in the crisis right now, a lot of folks have put off going to their doctors for routine checkups, simply because they don't want to run the risk of being exposed to COVID-19 as they go into these doctor's offices. And that's perfectly understandable. Folks have not wanted to overrun emergency rooms and things like that for care, but they need to have the health checkups. And by simply doing it like we're doing tonight, talking tonight, a doctor or nurse practitioner can talk with and say, well, you can wait until things get a little bit better, or you need to come in and see us. And it's a way that can deliver that where people will feel safe about getting out and getting that primary care, because that's the big driver for cost in the court system. I keep reverting back to my old job in the health system right now. Is people are afraid of the cost. They're afraid of going out. There's not the access to the primary care providers. This is one piece in putting people in touch with their primary care providers, albeit in a different way, to get routine checkups, to get the blood pressure under control, to get diabetes under control, and various acute ailments like that need to be done. So we hope it'll provide a step in that direction.
Yeah, it's definitely got to be a partnership between the local and the federal government to get the state government to get this moving for our citizens here and across the country. All right, I don't know if I see any other questions in the chat. Helen or Scott, have you seen any others there that we haven't gotten to?
I see one talking about why not make internet access much like public television? That it is a public good, and maybe we should push it out in that way, which is something that I could see you could make an argument for.
That's a-
It's certainly a topic we can talk about.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and there's a question about 5G cellular tech in addition to broadband.
Well, those are completely different platforms with the
Right.
with the mobile service. The 5G is supposed to be better than the 4G, but you still got an infrastructure problem with cell service too. You got to have the towers built to get the service out. For anybody that lives in Richmond County and they go from Rockingham to Southern Pines, when you go through the Hoffman area, it's 50-50 flip a coin on whether you're going to lose a cell call going through there, simply because there's not enough tower space. So that's a whole different issue that we need to get to, because broadband helps folks not have to rely on spotty service from a tower if that's how they're getting their internet. And I've run devices off the towers and data, and sometimes it's there and sometimes it's not. Broadband, especially if it's high speed, man, you get your answer. It works quick.
Yeah, and I think that cellular service, that's a whole different topic we could do a session on that too.
That's exactly right.
Because that is definitely an important issue. And this is one, someone referenced a question that did come earlier, Representative Brewer, that was more about the money that's already been allocated. I know there's supposed to be $9 million for broadband access from the federal monies that were, given the 3.5 billion. And so there was a question about, how is it being spent and how much do we think we need to make broadband available?
Well, the $9 million that was appropriated was to cover all of the grant requests that were made in the past year, including the ones that were turned down. So that's what the $9 million did. And when we did that legislation, everybody knew it was the first step. So where we would have time to access the needs, to look at all of the different things that we need to do. And we think that's what this bill is. It's giving us a little more time to get everything together, to see what more we need to do. There's still federal money available. It's narrowly tailored right now on what we can use it for. We're hoping that folks in Congress will work to let the states have more flexibility with the money. That certainly would be a big help. The more flexibility came with the bill that passed in the House, which I know is not to everybody's liking, but some really good things in the House bill that will help out rural areas. And this is the next step that everybody's talked about, and we're hoping that there will be a next step.
Right, and I know that bill did have, a provision that, I don't think it's probably going to go so far. There's going to be a lot of negotiation on that last bill, but they definitely were providing like $2 billion for a temporary expansion of the FCC's rural healthcare program. So comparable to Helen's question, so increasing the subsidy, say that 2 times quickly, rate from like 65 cents to 85 cents for payment. So there's a lot of good things, but we've just got to make sure that the will is there for our folks in DC across the lines to do that next step, because that $1,200 that folks received, that's run out for most folks, right? And so we've got to do something else to, support, folks through, what could be a return of this in the fall. We've got to continue to support, our Americans that are work so hard. They deserve not to have, their lives put back permanently due to this pandemic. So I think we're pretty close to time. So we'll just do some wrap ups here. So Representative Brewer, if you want to say some final words, and then Helen, and then I'll close out.
Sure. Well, thank you for doing this, and I apologize for being late. Normally we don't have a 5 o'clock committee meeting. It just happened today. Today was the day that we did. But broadband, as I said, is really an infrastructure issue now that's needed in the state every bit as much as roads. We've offered a solution in our bill to go forward to help pave those roads and build those miles that we need to do. We know that we don't have all the good ideas. There are plenty of good ideas out there. We want the conversation to be started. so we can sit down and work together to solve the problem. And I invite anybody out there, let your representative know if you have an idea. It may be something we haven't thought of. That we'll be glad to take a look at as we go through the committee process with these and the other bills that address the broadband issue. We really welcome everybody's input to find a way forward as we go through the next few weeks. So thank you, Cynthia, for putting this together. Of all the congressional districts in the state, I think yours is the most diverse, and it is the most impacted by the need for broadband of any other district in the state, other than counties way up in the mountains and on the far end of the coast. So it certainly presents a challenge to make sure the folks that live like where Wesley does in South Charlotte to where I represent parts of Montgomery County have the same access to service. And that's what we're aiming to do.
Yeah. All right. Helen,
Thank you, Cynthia.
future
Thank you
senator.
Thank you so much for putting this together. It's very timely and topical, and I appreciate the opportunity to spend the time with you and with Representative Brewer and Representative Harris, and also with all the participants on this call. I would like to say, Representative Brewer, thank you for your leadership on this issue. I know that Representative Rachel Hunt was also one of the individuals on this bill. She is a huge advocate for education in this state, as her father was as governor in years past. I would like to argue that I would hope we could return to being the leader in education in the South as we were under Governor Hunt's administration. I was reminded recently of the idea that you should never waste a crisis. And we are certainly undergoing a crisis, one that is being managed in ways quite well and in other ways not so well. I would argue that this is using the challenge of the pandemic as an opportunity to move forward on an issue that has been bubbling along and important, but has never been as important as it is now. I would hope that the clarity with which we see this will bring broad bipartisan support to your bill, Representative Brewer, and that we can move this issue forward for the state and for the people here in the district. Thank you again, Cynthia. It's an honor to be on with you. I'm privileged to know you. I'm privileged to be running with you. And I am so excited for your candidacy. I know that you're going to do great things in the U.S. House of Representatives.
Thank you, Helen. And thank you, Helen and Scott, for agreeing to do this. It's, when, I embarked on this journey, probably like a week before filing ended, and looking at, what were my, what would be and should be the top priorities for this district. Immediately, broadband was one of those top issues that, in knowing the district, knowing the needs, that people were struggling with, this is it. And if anything, this pandemic has shown us, as you said, Representative Brewer, it's even enhanced everyone's even understanding of this issue in ways that, they weren't talking about it 2 months ago, before we entered into the pandemic. And so, as you also mentioned, this is a very diverse district. From when you look at those, the tiers, and you look at the rankings from 1 to 100, in the Mecklenburg and Union County area, you have people that are in the highest tiers, from not distressed, as you look at then those other areas going out east in the district. They're in the top 10, several of those counties, because of high unemployment, high poverty rates, and all of those issues. And so we've got to make this district increase the equitability of the district, so that, as I talk about my issues, they're about economics and improving the economic outcomes of the people for District 9, not just for now, but for a generation. And so when we invest in things like expanding broadband, when we invest in ensuring that there's affordable access to healthcare, when we, do things that are going to reduce the cost of student loans with the $1.5 trillion of debt that we have in this country, we're going to bring equitability across this district, from rural Robinson County to, our more urban, more financially secure Mecklenburg. So I thank everyone for joining this important conversation. This is only the beginning. We will continue to have these conversations. I know hopefully we got to most of your questions. If you have any other questions, don't hesitate to reach out to me. My email address is cynthia@cynthiawallaceforcongress.com. I know Helen is open to future conversations. I think we've heard some other ideas on this call that maybe we hadn't thought about. So we definitely want to investigate those ideas as well so that we can solve this and start moving our district and our country forward. Thank you, everyone. Have a good night.